welcome to Moms on Mics. I'm Joanne,
I'm Cash.
And I'm Sophia.
and this week we are wrapping up our series on the West Memphis 3 case with analysis from two former FBI profilers. And then, what you've all been waiting for, we will give you our theories. Da da da.
I already forgot mine. I said
God
it already.
damn it!
Can we just edit it in?
Damn
I had
it,
a really good
Sophia.
one.
You did.
I should have wrote it down.
I was gonna message you
Oh my
today and be
God.
like, hey, don't forget to write down your
Oh my
theory.
God, I
Okay,
should
well,
have
you've got
wrote
time to
it
think about
down.
it
Oh
and try
God,
and
I can't
remember.
remember that far back. That was forever ago.
It was not forever ago.
I think I remember.
Okay, so victims, triple homicide, May 5th, 1993, West Memphis, Arkansas. Stephen Branch, age 8, deceased. Christopher Byers, age 8, deceased. Michael Moore, age 8, deceased. Subjects, Jason Baldwin, age 16, life sentence. Jesse Miskelly, age 17, life sentence. Damian Eccles, age 18, death sentence. At the request of attorney Dennis P. Riordan, an analysis of captioned triple homicide was conducted by me, not me personally, by former FBI Unit Chief John E. Douglas. He's more qualified than I am to do this, So Investigative Support Unit of the National Center for the Analysis of Violent Crime. Mr. Riordan is counsel for convicted subject Damian Eccles and requested that captioned case be analyzed for the purpose of possibly providing the following: motive for unsubs, homicide classification, type criminal personality profile for unsubs. In order to fully comprehend the process of this analysis, the following information will first be addressed. Herein, criminal investigative analysis, defined investigative research in violent crime ritual, crime classification categories, purpose of CIA, case analysis crime, analysis classification of homicide using the crime classification manual, control of victims, further behavioral manifestations at a crime scene offender profile summary, criminal investigative analysis, defined criminal. So all that gobbledygook to basically say John Douglas, the famous FBI guy, gonna tell you some shit. His theories of the case. So investigative analysis is a process whereby crimes are reviewed in their totality from both a behavioral and investigative perspective. It involves reviewing and assessing the facts of a criminal act, interpreting offender behavior before, during, and after the criminal act, developing strategies, profile of unknown offenders, assessment of suspects, interview and interrogation strategies, search warrant information based on research, prosecutive and trial assistance, and expert testimony in the areas of motive, MO, and signature ritual analysis. Investigative research in violent crime in the late 1970s, one along with NCAVC colleagues, were tasked by the FBI to conduct research in the area of violent crime. The National Institute of Justice awarded grants for the research, and 2 textbooks were published. John Douglas co-authored Sexual Homicides, Patterns and Motives in 1988, and the Crime Classification Manual. During the early 1980s to early 1990s, while teaching at the FBI Academy and conducting numerous interpersonal violence conferences, there were several occasions where an investigator would use the word ritual in application to a homicide, and this was believed rooted to Satanism. Reports of satanic crimes by mass media served to cloud investigative issues, at times compromised law enforcement's ability to conduct an objective investigation. The religious beliefs of a law enforcement officer at times complicated the process of objectively investigating an alleged satanic homicide. Additionally, the words ritual, satanic, and occult were oftentimes used interchangeably in response to law enforcement, the general public, and the media perception that satanic crimes were real and a problem that needed to be addressed.
The NCAVC attempted to solicit cases from law enforcement agencies making claims of Satanism. Many of the cases, such as Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker, and David Berkowitz, the son of Sam, exhibited possible indicators of Satanism. However, the primary motive in each case reviewed by the NCAVC was found to be motivationally driven by sex, money, or interpersonal conflicts, and did not satisfy the requirements of occultism or Satanism. It was determined in every case analyzed. The actual involvement in Satanism was secondary, insignificant, or non existent. It was also revealed during legal proceedings that it was the defense who attempted to introduce Satanism in an effort to escape criminal responsibility or minimize punishment for their client. Ritual crime research in this area revealed that a ritual crime is personal in nature. It fulfills the need of an offender, either sexually, spiritually, or some psychological need only known by the offender. Ritualized acts observed and perpetrated by offenders included necrophilia, urination, or defecation on a victim, posing or displaying a victim after death, as well as amputation and the evisceration of a victim. Results of ritualistic crimes were not found satanic, but rather were for some personal gratification or need for ritual behavior on the part of the offender. Research revealed that it was a way for some violent offenders to fulfill their sadistic and perverted needs. Some of the offenders studied mutilated bodies, amputated limbs from victims, cannibalized victims, and some bathed in the victim's blood. In every case studied, the offender was found either mentally ill or sane, but having some personality disorder. In no case was the offender or his crime found associated or affiliated with some satanic belief or ideology. During the same time frame, there were numerous and misleading claims by the media that 1 in 3 children in the U.S. were sexually molested, that there were numerous child sex slave rings operating in the U.S., and over 50,000 stranger abducted children were missing each year in the U.S. Yet the U.S., the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention, estimated on average approximately 100 stranger abductions of children occurred each year. OJJDP never once reported a single satanic child homicide. The FBI's NCAVC published its findings in January 1992 in a book entitled Investigative Guide to Allegations of Ritual Child Abuse. In summary, the NCAVC research determined there was no purpose for law enforcement or reason to claim someone was a Satanist. If anything, it would bolster a defense by claiming their client was insane or had diminished capacity, or may be used to deflect from a case where sex, robbery, or some personal cause was the actual motive. Crime classification categories during the initial stages of compiling the CCM, the group cause category considered satanic murder as one of its subcategories. There was an abundance of literature available relative to occultism and Satanism. However, as the NCAVC began to review the occult and satanic category, we questioned the validity of including this category into the CCM. Based on literature, the definition of a true occult or satanic murder is a murder committed by 2 or more individuals who rationally plan the crime and whose primary motive is to fulfill a prescribed satanic ritual calling for murder. Committee members found no research evidence of the existence of the satanic homicides.
It's a lot, and it's like loaded with information. This is John Douglas explaining what the parameters are, like what it means to be classed as a satanic or occult murders and stuff. This is him basically leading up to giving his explanation to his theories on this case. So this is all his words. We are quoting him.
Okay, based on the above, the authors of the CCM excluded occult and satanic murderers from the CCM. In September 2006, the second edition of the CCM was published, and once again, its authors excluded occult and satanic murderers as a subcategory due to the absence of research and investigative evidence. The CCM separates homicide into four major categories. Criminal enterprise homicide entails murder committed for material gain. Example, money, goods, territory, or favors. Group cause with two or more people with a common ideology that sanction an act committed by one or more of its members that results in death. Example, gang-related homicides. Sexual homicide involves a sexual element or activity as the basis for the sequence of acts leading to death. Performance and meaning of the sexual element vary with the offender. The act may range from actual rape involving penetration, either before or after death, to a symbolic sexual assault, such as insertion of foreign objects into the victim's body. Personal cause homicide, motivated by personal cause, is an act from interpersonal aggression and results in the death of person or persons who may or may not be known to each other. The homicide is not motivated by material gain or sex and is not sanctioned by a group. It is the result of an underlining emotional conflict that propels the offender to kill. Purpose of criminal investigative analysis. The purpose of CIA is to generate potential leads, as well as suspects who, based on past case experience and research, would most likely perpetrate the type of crime being investigated. Example, homicide, rape, arson, kidnapping, etc. In most cases, an analysis is requested in order to provide investigative direction when the perpetrator's motive and intent are unknown. An analysis may reinforce the course or direction of the investigation or may in fact redirect an investigation if it appears the investigation has been somehow misdirected or maligned. From prior investigative experience, cases have been misdirected by misinformation relative to eyewitnesses' testimony. Lack of investigative experience, false confessions, contamination at the crime scene, and or the mishandling of evidence during the collection and preservation of the scene. Analysis, whether a case is submitted for analysis, the written assessment is preferred by the following statement. This analysis is based upon information available at the time this report was prepared and assumes that the information provided was obtained through a comprehensive, thorough, and well-planned investigation. Should any additional information or case materials become available at a later date, those materials would be reviewed in order to determine whether they are germane to issues discussed herein. Subsequent to such a review, certain aspects of this analysis may be subject to modification or change. Relative to the instant case, this crime was presented by police and prosecutors as satanic, and according to the medical examiner, one particular victim was emasculated by the killer. The medical examiner's conclusion had a major impact and influence when initially analyzing the case relative to determining the offender's primary motive. However, as set forth herein, the medical examiner's initial findings and conclusions, according to one of America's foremost forensic pathologists, Dr. Warner Spitz, MD, and forensic scientist Dr. John Nordby, PhD, were inaccurate. In their professional opinion, all three victims were attacked post-mortem by some predatory animal. They were attacked by an animal?
So the bodies
Wild.
were, right? That was the animal predation. Oh, we did those without you, right?
They
Is that
were
right?
they were what? They were attacked by an animal?
Yeah, when they were in the water and that
Really?
the snapping turtles and all that.
Yeah.
Oh.
So
Okay.
what they thought were bite marks, like what the investigative and
Oh.
yeah, that's right. We covered that without you. I forgot.
Okay.
Did we not? We didn't
I
talk
don't
about it
remember
after?
hearing. No, I
Oh,
don't remember. No,
I
I
think we
remember hearing something about bite mark, but I don't know.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
think we touched base on it, but most of it was in the autopsies.
crazy. Yeah, I didn't see those notes. I didn't want to see them.
right.
Okay.
So initially, they thought it was human bite marks, right? So when they were
Right.
talking about like John Mark Byers having his teeth removed and Terry Hobbs, so the fact that they had their teeth removed almost makes it more suspicious,
Right.
right? Because it wasn't that at all. It was turtles. And so a lot of the cut marks and what they thought were human bite marks were snapping turtles. And it's the way that the turtles basically, the scratches that they thought were like knife marks, they have to keep swimming basically to stay afloat. So while they're eating,
My God.
they're going like this, but not to scratch at it, but to like
To
stay
stay
afloat. Yeah,
afloat.
like
And
Yeah.
there's a video out there too that you can search, and it shows you not on a live one, but like on a piece of meat, it'll show you what
on a
to
pig, right? Yeah.
Oh, I don't even want to see that.
It's actually quite informative because, and this one guy, he puts his arm in and he lets a turtle grab a hold
I'll
and
search it up.
bite. And it just shows you exactly the marks on the body are exactly the same as the bite mark on his arm and the scratches from the turtle.
So,
Because most people assume turtles have like no teeth and no,
so
like they're
this
just,
is, yeah, like that's wild that there's
yeah.
snapping turtles in there.
Yeah, there's a few different species of turtles, but I guess the locals in the area, like especially the kids, they did in the movie West of Memphis, they interviewed local kids that were kids at the same time as Christopher and Michael and Stevie. They were like their classmates basically, and they were saying how they all knew to stay out of the water because if you put your foot in the water, it would get bit by a snapping turtle. Were
And
they
they're huge.
alligator turtles?
They're
I
massive.
think they were. I think they were.
Yeah, so they're like super bitey.
And the video is not that bad at all. Like it's not gory or anything. They literally
No,
show you the how the bites would look on like skin.
yeah.
Like they're huge.
Some are, yeah, but there's some that's the problem is there's a few different species, and so they're different sizes, and they're all in this area. So a lot of the, honestly, it's the only way to explain all the different wounds, like the
That's
different
great.
sizes. And
Yeah. Okay. All right.
so it kind
Sorry.
of, no, it's all good. It basically, they were killed with blunt force trauma,
Yeah.
and the rest of the wounds was
Yeah.
animal predation.
Okay. Okay.
So the following analysis was based upon a thorough review of investigative materials provided to me, John Douglas, not me, by attorney Dennis Riordan. Information utilized to formulate this analysis included police investigative reports relative to the overall crime and case impressions by investigators at the time, crime scene photographs, crime scene diagrams, autopsy photographs, autopsy protocols, forensic evaluation evidence, neighborhood demographics, victimology data, victims' risk level, and results of interviews with friends, neighbors, acquaintances of the victims. In addition, a visit to the crime scene location was conducted. Although it was 13 years since the homicides, the immediate area had remained reasonably the same. The Mayfair apartment complex, which is adjacent to the Robin Hood Hills area, was no longer occupied. Preliminary case review. After a preliminary review of the case, it was said captioned subjects were involved in satanic worship, and consequently, it was assisted by the investigators and prosecutors as a quote unquote satanic expert, because we know he wasn't, that this was the motivating factor in the death of the captioned victims. When learning the children were supposedly victims of some sort of satanic ritual sacrifice, an underlying motive in the deaths of three 8-year-old boys, I was very interested in determining how this conclusion came about. In all my 25 years of investigative experience in the FBI, John Douglas, not me, and after 11 years as a private consultant to prosecutors and defense attorneys in a variety of cases, I have yet to see a single homicide case which was determined to be a satanic ritual homicide. Perhaps this will be my first. Victimology, examination of victims' background, is a significant part of the analysis process. The three victims' vulnerability to becoming victims of violent crime was examined, in conjunction with a review of their lifestyle, reputation, behavior, and personal history. Specifically, what, if anything, made them susceptible to become a victim of a violent crime? Were they specifically targeted or random victims? All three victims were 8 years old and were approximately the same weight and height. Average weight 57 pounds, average height 4'1". They attended the same elementary school and lived in the same low to middle socioeconomic class neighborhood. Investigative reports indicated the Byers victim was punished by spanking from his stepfather because he left home after school without permission. One neighbor observed the victims traveling on 2 bicycles carrying what appeared to be camping equipment. There was nothing of significance in their backgrounds that would categorize the victims as high risk. Just to note, though, they did not have camping gear or backpacks. I don't know if you remember, there was a couple witnesses that said they saw them with backpacks, but no backpacks were ever found. It was not accurate. It was not accurate sighting. So they didn't have backpacks or camping gear. So neighborhood, as stated above, the victim's neighborhood was comprised of low to middle socioeconomic families. At the time of the homicides, there were several unoccupied homes scattered throughout the neighborhood and adjacent to the Robin Hood Hills area where the victims were discovered. Located in the Robin Hood Hills area was a transient apartment complex known as the Mayfair Apartment Complex. According to investigators, the apartment was a haven for drug offenders and sometimes a residence for convicted sex offenders out on parole. The area known as Robin Hood Hills is contained by I-40 and I-35 to the north and by 10 Mile Bayou Division to the south. The crime scene area was heavily wooded at the time and several meandering footpaths leading in and out of the woods.
The most common method of entering Robin Hood Hills was from the intersection of McNulty Drive West and West East Cat Street. Along the West East Cat Street are homes with backyards facing north towards Robin Hood Hills. At the time of the homicides, there was a footpath leading into Robin Hood Hills from McNulty Drive West. The footpath led to a pipeline which crosses the 10 Mile Bayou. Anyone using this pipeline would have to have some degree of balance and agility, or they could easily fall into the water below. Due to the remoteness of the area, the Robin Hood Hills area is a potentially high-risk crime area for young children to play in at any time of the day, and particularly when darkness approaches. Generally, children are safer if they are playing with others. However, the victims were just 8 years of age, were of small physical stature, and were playing in a remote and isolated area. If there were cries for help during an assault, the canopy of trees, coupled with traffic noises from I-40 and I-55, could easily muffle any distress calls from the victims. When the victims decided to play in the isolated and wooded area of Robin Hood Hills, the risk level of becoming a victim of a violent crime automatically increased. Medical examiner's findings. The purpose of this section is to discuss the significant findings of the medical examiner and to address the significance of both the victim's injuries and other activities by offender or offenders. As previously stated, this analysis is not a substitute for a thorough and well-planned investigation. The key to the successful resolution of any case rests with investigators properly collecting and preserving evidence at the scene of the crime. Unfortunately, by the time the Crittenden County coroner arrived to the scene, investigators had already removed the 3 victims from the drainage ditch where the victims were disposed. This unfortunate act possibly corrupted any forensic evidence recovered at the scene, which could be later linked to the unsub or unsubs. The autopsy's findings and reports submitted by Dr. Frank Peretti were reviewed and are briefly summarized below. It is noted that Dr. Peretti did not recognize predatory postmortem wounds inflicted on the victims. Analysis specific to the 3 victims in the case follows. Michael Moore, victim's date of birth, 7/27/84. It was Dr. Peretti's opinion that James Michael Moore died as a result of multiple injuries and drowning. The victim was found in approximately 2 to 2.5 feet of water. His nude body was tied wrist to ankles bilaterally in a hog tie fashion. Dr. Peretti noted little marks present on the lateral margins and tip of the tongue. Dr. Peretti did not identify the bite marks as being human or from some animal predator. The victim received numerous blunt force injuries to the head and torso. Defense-type wounds were observed by Dr. Peretti on the victim's hands. Stephen Edward Branch, victim date of birth, 11/24/84. Dr. Peretti notes Branch's cause of death was the result of a blunt force trauma injuries to the victim's head, torso, and extremities and drowning. Like Moore, Branch was found naked and hogtied in approximately 2 to 2.5 feet of water. Dr. Peretti described the victim's left side of his face and ears showing confluent red abrasions with multiple gouging-type irregular wounds and overlaying abrasions. Dr. Peretti made note of the victim's penis having red-purple coloring with very fine superficial scratches. It was not noted what type of instrument, weapon, or animal could have caused the multiple gouging, abrasions, and the fine superficial scratches.
Christopher Michael Byers, victim, date of birth, June 23rd, 1984. Dr. Peretti concluded the victim died as a result of multiple injuries. The victim was found naked and hogtied in a drain ditch containing 2 to 2.5 feet of water. The victim had multiple linear abrasions measuring 1/2 inch to 1 inch. Multiple abrasions were found on the victim's face. Dr. Peretti reported multiple superficial bite marks on both the left and right cheek of the victim. Dr. Peretti described multiple gouging superficial wounds and multiple cutting wounds surrounding the perineum area of the skin between the testicles and the anus. In addition, toxology tests revealed a non-therapeutic level of carbamazepine in the victim's blood. This prescription drug was used in the treatment of attention deficit disorder, known as ADD or ADHD. It was determined via interview with the stepfather that the victim did not take his medicine the day of his death. Dr. Peretti did not address who or what caused the gouging, cutting, and bite marks. As noted earlier in the report, Dr. Spitz and Dr. Nordby each concluded that the victim's wounds, other than those from blunt force trauma, were caused by animal predation. Crime analysis, one of the fundamental tenets of crime scene analysis, is to evaluate variables which explain why the captioned victims became victims of a homicide. While conducting an analysis of the behavior that is manifested at violent crime scenes, it is important to avoid becoming too focused on any one aspect of the crime scene and ascribing singular importance to it. It is the totality of the circumstances, rather than a single crime scene variable, that is important in assessing not only what happened, but why and how it happened. The most accurate way of assessing the overall victim-offender interaction is to consider the occurrence of various behavioral attributes in conjunction with one another. Assessing the following variables provides insight into the state of mind of the victims and the unsubs prior to their deaths. The victim's perceptions or lack thereof, the risk to which the victim is exposed, the offender's level of risk, intent, degree of organization and planning, presence or absence of displayed anger, and degree of control exercised over the victims, the scene, and himself. Offender's choice of weapons and whether he brought them or obtained them at the scene. Significance of the nature, location, and severity of the victim's injuries. Significance of method used to control the victims, significant of method used to dispose of the victims' clothing, and the victims' bicycles. To explain the murders of the three victims is not only important to analyze the crime with respect to what is observed behaviorally, but to integrate that analysis with what is factually known through investigative interviews and forensic evaluation of evidence. Assessing the motivation of the murders of the three children and placing the magnitude of these murders into context is paramount to establishing a framework for understanding the dynamics of this crime.
Classification of homicides using the crime classification manual. When initially reviewing the case materials, my first impression was that the case was a lust murder, with the Byers victim being the primary target. The opinion was based in large part by the findings of medical examiner Dr. Peretti. Dr. Peretti opined that victim Byers was emasculated by use of a sharp instrument. His courtroom testimony indicated the emasculation was so surgically precise that even he would have difficulty performing such precise surgical acts, even under the best operative conditions. The crime classification manual defines, quote, lust murder as any case where the assailant cuts, stabs, pierces, or mutilates the sexual organs of a victim. The victim may be either male or female. A distinguishing characteristic of the lust murder involves extreme mutilation and body dismemberment. The attack is frenzied in appearance, but primarily focuses on the genital areas of the victim. The lust murderer oftentimes bites victims in the breast, buttocks, abdomen, thighs, and/or genitals. The most common method of killing for the lust murderer is strangulation, blunt force trauma, or stabbing with a sharp instrument. The crime oftentimes displays what is referred to as, quote, overkill, which is excessive trauma or injury beyond what is necessary to cause death. Dr. Peretti described the wounds as having the appearance of gouging, some bite marks, cutting, and blunt force trauma wounds. While Dr. Peretti stated the cutting wounds were caused by a knife, however, he did not address the cause of the gouging and bite marks. As a result of the most recent findings of Dr. Spitz and Dr. Norby, it can now be concluded that this is not, in fact, a, quote, lust murder case, or for that matter, a so-called, quote, satanic homicide. Other than the blunt force trauma wounds, the other contributing and significant wounds, according to Dr. Spitz and Dr. Nordby, are attributed to animal predation. Their findings totally change the classification type of this triple homicide and will be addressed later in this report. Control of victims. A significant behavioral consideration is the location, nature, and severity of the injuries, their intended lethality. The offender was very methodical about the killings. He made all three victims remove their clothing. This tactic and MO had been observed in other cases where the offender not only intended to place fear in the minds of the victim by removing their clothing, but also causes some embarrassment to the point where the victim does not want to run out totally naked into a public area. The offender knows this tactic is an effective means of controlling young victims. The offender also utilized another controlling technique that I personally have never seen before in any other violent crimes. The offender utilized shoelaces from the victim's tennis shoes to, quote, hogtie the victims. According to reports, the Byers victim was tied by a half-inch and double half-hitch knots in a, quote, hogtied fashion, wrists to ankles. The Branch victim was tied in a similar fashion, and the knots were all half hitches. The Moore victim was, quote, hogtied with square knots on his left wrist and ankle, and half hitch knots on his right wrist and ankle. Several possibilities were considered for the different knots used in the Moore bindings. They were as follows. Possibility of multiple offenders involved in the case. The offender himself used two styles of knots familiar to him. The offender had one of the victims help him bind the Moore victim. Having victims tie one another has been observed in previous cases. What cannot possibly be concluded from this one aspect of this case is whether there was more than one offender involved.
A forensic expert for the prosecution testified during the trial about the types of knots utilized by the offender, but never gave an opinion as to the significance of the different knots relative to the Moore victim. What is behaviorally unique is the offender's overall thought process during the assault. The offender was criminally clever to utilize the shoelace as the bindings. The question, though, is why did the offender want to hogtie the victims? If the intent was to kill the victims, why tie them? This aspect of the case will be addressed later in the report as well. The general area where the victims located was said to be transient. In fact, Detective Brian Ridge found a bag of clothing in the area of the homicides. The clothing included a pair of Jordache jeans, a size 33 to 34, 2 Bic razors, 1 pair of socks, 1 medium black shirt, 1 large short sleeve shirt, and 1 Roadrunner bag. In addition, there were numerous empty cans and beer bottles and cigarette butts located in and around the crime scene. It was never determined from either trace evidence or from possible latent prints on the plastic bag whose bag of clothing it belonged to. Further behavioral manifestations at a crime scene behavior reflects personality, and the behavior exhibited by the offender at the crime scene reveals his personality characteristics. The method and the manner in which the offender perpetrated instant homicides is indicative of who he is and what he is like as a person. The commission of a violent crime involved in the personal attributes of what we recognize as an individual's normal behavior. Such normal behavior is unique to that individual. In addition to the uniqueness revealed in this case relative to how the victims were hogtied, there were other behavioral indicators which reflect upon the offender as well. Post-offense behavior reflects the offender felt like the need to hide the victim's clothing at the scene. He did so by placing small branches obtained at the scene and sticking them in the clothing and pushing under the bayou's muddy water and out of view. The victims were also hidden from view underwater in the drainage ditch. Also significant in the overall analysis was that the offender felt like the compulsion as a final act to toss the victims' 2 bikes into the bayou and out of sight. Offender's profile. It is my professional opinion this is a, quote, personal cause homicide. There are no crime or crime scene indications that these cases are the result of either a group cause homicide, sexual homicide, or criminal enterprise type of homicide. This is a personal cause, triple homicide, perpetrated by someone whose initial intent was not to kill the victims, but rather to taunt, punish, and or teach the victims a lesson. The reason this can be concluded is because the offender did not immediately kill the victims. They were alive for a period of time as they were being stripped naked and hogtied. It is my opinion this offender went too far with his taunting and punishment and knew he would be implicated if he let the children go free because he knew the victims and lived in the immediate area. There was another rational and logical criminal reason why the offender hid the victims, their clothing and bicycles in the drainage ditch and bayou.
The offender did not want the victims to be immediately found. He needed time in order to establish an alibi for himself. It is my opinion the victims came into the woods of Robin Hood Hills by the most common method, and that was by crossing the wood and pipe makeshift bridge. It is inconceivable that they carried their bikes across this very narrow width bridge, nor is there any evidence they entered Robin Hood Hills at another location or were killed somewhere else and disposed of in Robin Hood Hills. It required much balance crossing the bridge, and the chances of falling off the bridge while carrying their bicycles was high. It is my opinion the victims left their bicycles hidden in the tall grass and weeds before they each walked across the pipe bridge. This is an important aspect of the crime to consider because the offender, in all probability, threw the bikes into the bayou after crossing back over the pipe bridge, walking in the same general direction where both he and the victims lived. The type of offender responsible in these types of homicides was determined from the original National Institute of Justice research grants as the organized type of offender. The organized offender is described as being self-centered, egocentric, and narcissistic. He resents people but does not avoid social situations. He looks at social situations as an opportunity to manipulate and use others for his own personal gain. The organized type is known for his cunningness and his very methodical in his everyday activities. Because of his criminal intellect based on his previous criminal activities, he is seen as adaptive and flexible when criminally active. Although having described the offender as flexible and adaptive, he prefers to perpetrate crimes in close proximity to where he either resides or is employed. It is his comfort zone. The organized type is cognizant of not leaving evidence at the scene, which could be forensically linked to him, stripping the victims, hog tying them, using sticks to submerge and hide the victim's clothing, throwing the victim's bicycles in the water, as well as dispersing the victims in water, all reflect and speak to the offender's criminal mind. It is not uncommon for the organized type of offender to be overly cooperative post-offense. In view of the fact that he lived in the general neighborhood and knew the victims, he realized law enforcement would be asking him questions relative to the case and his whereabouts at the time. The organized offender's cooperativeness is for the purpose to deflect suspicions away from him as a suspect. Due to the brutality exhibited by the offender at the scene, it can be said with confidence that he has a reputation from his past behavioral problems as having an unpredictable and extremely explosive and violent personality. Although this crime may in fact be the first time he has killed anyone, it is not the first time he has violently attacked someone. Predicting the age of an offender at the time of a crime is difficult. There is chronological age and behavioral age to consider. However, based upon the method and manner of death of the three victims, coupled with the offender's behavior post-offense, which included secreting the victims and disposing of their clothing and bicycles in the water, what can in fact be said with a high degree of certainty is that this triple homicide was not a crime perpetrated by a youthful offender or one without a history of past violent behavior.
The violent prone offender responsible for these homicides did not happen to just evolve on May 5th, 1993, as a triple murderer. He has a violent past, and I would expect him to have a violent future as well. The offender demonstrated criminal intellect by the method and manner in which he controlled the victims and the way in which he disposed of them and hid their clothing and bicycles in the bayou. This was a relatively, quote, low-risk crime on the part of the offender because the crime scene area was isolated and he was familiar with the area. On the other hand, the area was potentially a high-risk area for victims due to its isolation. There is no evidence to indicate these homicides were motivated by a financial gain, like a robbery. There was no evidence to indicate the homicides were perpetrated by multiple offenders or related to Satanism or some satanic ritual. There is no evidence of a ritualistic behavior at the crime scene. What is evidence is a criminally sophisticated modus operandi. Summary: the offender acted alone and was familiar with the victims, and the geographical area will in fact have a violent history in his past and future. The offender was not a teenager at the time of the homicides. The crime demonstrated criminal sophistication and knowledge not observed in previous and very rare cases where teens were subject to multiple homicides, like school shootings. There was no evidence at the scene or in any way the victims were murdered that this was some satanic-related type of crime, and this was a personal cause-driven crime, with the victims dying from a combination of blunt force trauma wounds and drowning. What was believed at the time to be some type of satanic ritualistic mutilation upon victims, we now know from forensic experts, was in fact caused by the result of animal predation. Douglas spoke at a news conference after completing his investigation of the case in 2007, and he said, quote, "I saw criminal sophistication at the crime scene," said Douglas. Quote, "the tying of the wrists to their ankles," he said his profile of the killer does not match that of the convicted teenagers. Using that kind of concerted effort, we're not looking at teenagers committing crimes here. said Douglas. We're looking at someone who is relatively criminally sophisticated. Now, I will say this is not to say that teenagers don't commit horrific crimes, because they do, and they have. And it's not disregarding that at all. It's just this case in particular.
Prosecutors argued that Eccles, Baldwin, and Miss Kelly sexually assaulted and beat the boys in a satanic ritual. Douglas disagrees. This is not a satanic murder, he said. There's no ritual. Prosecutors also argued the West Memphis Three did not know the victims. This is not a homicide perpetrated by a stranger, said Douglas. The person responsible for this crime knew the victims and knew the victims well. Let's look at the reaction of these two suspects when suspicion reared its ugly head. JMB loudly proclaimed his innocence, offered to take a polygraph, offered any sample requested for testing, and in short, acted like an outraged, innocent, grieving adoptive father. TH, or lawyered up, tried to sue Natalie Maine's pastor, and the Dixie Chicks tried to stay out of the limelight as much as possible. When cornered, proclaimed his innocence, but in my opinion, not very convincingly. But to this day, still refuses to submit to a polygraph or give any new biological samples for testing. Now, which person is more suspicious to you? Retired FBI Supervisory Agent Jim Clemente created a suspect profile to help narrow down the possible suspect pool. Clemente noted there was no indication forensically that there's more than one offender involved because what happened to each of the victims was consistent. He also theorized that the killer knew the victims because he was able to, quote, control 3 victims without any help. If some stranger who looked very threatening approached these 3 boys, I think the first reaction of these boys would be to run away, to look for help. There's absolutely no indication of that in this case. So this tells me this offender was someone they knew, Clemente said.
Furthermore, Clemente believes the assailant was a male in his 30s who is either biologically related to one or more of the victims, a family member or a very close community member. If they thought they could trust the person who was the actual threat, then that person could get close enough to them to control them so that they couldn't run away. If the offender came across the boys as they were doing something wrong or misbehaving, it would have been even easier to control and reprimand them, said Clemente. Then perhaps the punishment went too far and it resulted in the triple homicide. This was a result of getting enraged, going too far, and then having to basically clean up the mess, he said, based on the way the boys were tied up, hands bound on either side of the body to the same side ankle. Clemente theorized the suspect is somebody who works with animal carcasses, a butcher or a hunter. The ligatures are not restraining ligatures. They seem to me to be more practical ligatures. Clemente said, but what is the purpose of that? Well, it minimizes the package a little bit and makes it easier to control after they're dead. When investigators found the boys' bodies on May 6, 1993, they had been jammed into the muddy ground of the bayou and their clothes had been submerged in the water with sticks. Branch and Moore's bikes were discovered on either side of a pipe bridge not far from the crime scene. Clemente pointed out that the killer took his time to conceal the boys' bodies, clothing, and bikes. He had to spend this time because if he didn't, he would get caught. I think he spent more time on concealing the bodies and the clothing and the bikes than he did on the actual murders. The time spent to conceal them would have been skipped completely if there was no known relationship to the victims. In addition to the offender being a male who had a relationship with one or more of the victims, Clemente thinks the suspect was from the neighborhood, theorizing that he hid the bodies in order to give himself enough time to establish an alibi. The assailant is also prone to violent outbursts, likely has a history of domestic violence, and places a high importance on punishment. I believe there was an incident of over-disciplining one of the boys. It went too far, and because of that, he had to kill all 3 of them, he said.
So you have heard the evidence and the timeline. We've gone through expert opinions and the suspects and their backgrounds. We've had 18, technically 19, episodes on the case of the West Memphis Three. So what happened? The truth, we may never know. All we have are theories. So here's ours. Sophia, you
Why
get to
do
go first so that you
I?
don't forget it.
Oh, you already wrote all this in
No, those
here.
are mine. Don't read those. Don't read those.
Oh,
Don't.
well, you have like a whole story,
It's
and I
fine.
have like one thing.
It's fine. It doesn't matter. I have
Okay,
been obsessed with this case for years.
I think the boys were supposed to be home at a certain time, and they weren't. And Mr. Hobbs, Terry Hobbs, that's his name, right?
Yep.
He got mad and he went to look for them and he found them and he probably hit his kid or did something and killed him, right? Could have fell, bumped his head, who knows? But then he ended up having to kill all three of them. That's what I think happened.
Allegedly, and in Sophia's opinion.
Oh yeah, allegedly, and in my opinion, that's
Yeah.
what happened. That's what I think. I think that he
Yeah.
got pissed off that he didn't come home and went to look for them, and like this says punishment went too far,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And then he had to kill all three of them to because what is the saying? Three can keep a secret if two are dead.
Oh,
Yeah.
I've never heard that, but I do
So
like
this
that.
is
I
like
mean, I don't like
four
it, but yeah.
four can keep a secret if three are dead,
Yeah.
right? So he had to do it.
Yeah, that's really good.
That's what I think.
I do not disagree. Cash, do you have a theory?
See, I don't really have a theory per se because there's a lot of shit in that thing.
Yeah,
I always knew it wasn't the three teenagers. Even
exactly.
as much as Eccles just ran his mouth, I still knew it wasn't him. But saying that, I knew it would be one of the stepdads.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Because watching those documentaries, just seeing how they come across, like just body language, their actions, it is one of them.
yeah,
And being a stepdad, do you know what I mean? Like, that's not their real child. A lot of stepdads look at it like that. That's not your real child. They need to do whatever, right?
yeah.
So I think it's one of the stepdads. I can't say per hands down, but
See, I definitely don't think it was John Mark Byers because he was so boisterous in the documentaries, right? If you have murdered three children, you're going to shut the fuck up when they're blaming it on somebody else, right? Yeah, you might agree with them, but I don't feel like you're going to push it so much. And I also don't think you would be willing to, yep, absolutely, I'll take a lie detector test. I'll give you my DNA. I'll do whatever you need because that's how you get caught.
Mhm.
Right. So, yeah, even if he is boisterous and being like, oh, yeah, it was them. They did it. They did it. I don't think you would really do that. But that's just me personally. Someone else might. I don't think at all you're going to agree to the lie detector or the DNA tests and stuff.
Mhm. Agreed.
But I do agree, stepdad, that only leaves one. Okay. So here's
Yeah,
my.
here's her book
Here's
of
okay.
theory. Her book of theory.
Theories,
They're her book of
plural.
theories.
Because
We're
I
gonna
have.
be here a long
Oh
time.
yeah. No, I'll read it quick. I'll read it quick. So my theory number one, because I cannot narrow it down. I cannot pick just one. I've tried, but I can't. So theory number one, shocker. I think Terry Hobbs went into the woods looking for Stevie shortly after the Ballards had seen him yelling for them to go home. I think he first took Amanda to David Jacoby's house. Then he went into the woods and came across the boys, possibly naked or partially naked. Remember, he doesn't have a solid alibi from 6 till 9. Chad Bell, the friend of Ryan Clark, Christopher Byers' older brother, told police that 2 months before the murders, he had found Christopher and Michael behind the Weaver school. Both of them were naked and possibly engaged in some sort of sexual activity. I do not say this to shame anybody. They were young kids. Kids explore, kids do things like this all the time. It is not unheard of, right? A month before the murders, he and Ryan walked in on Christopher masturbating. Now, this could be significant because if you remember, all the boys were found naked, and it's always been assumed that the killer forced them to take their clothes off. But if the boys went into the woods for some sexual exploration for the boys themselves, and Terry Hobbs discovered them in the woods without their clothes on, doing something, quote, embarrassing or morally wrong, remember this was 1993, the Bible Belt, Arkansas. He could have become enraged. This would explain why the boys didn't have their clothes on and why there was no blood or other evidence found on their clothes. Because they were killed by blunt force trauma, there should have been blood on their clothes, right? While 8 years old may seem young to be engaged in this type of activity, one thing that can lead to this activity at such a young age is sexual abuse or molestation. Melissa Byers was actually worried that someone was molesting Christopher and had asked him about it. And we just heard how Terry Hobbs was accused of sexual molestation of Stevie and his sister Amanda. Remember, Aaron Hutchinson had said what he had said about going into the woods with Christopher and Michael and watching men engage in sexual activity? Maybe it was the boys themselves that were engaging in the sexual activity, the experimental stuff, or they could have witnessed the activity and then tried it out themselves. Unfortunately, the police never looked into any of this, and the police believe that Aaron Hutchinson actually did see something. So I think his story was just elaborated from, he didn't want to say it was them doing it, right? I think when Terry Hobbs came upon the boys and was furious, he struck Stevie. So much like what you said, Sophia. He struck him in the head with the butt of his gun because he had a gun. Right? I think it's possible that Mr. Bojangles came across the scene when Michael Moore tried to run away and he ran into him. Terry pointed the gun at Mr. Bojangles and forced him to help, saying that he would just say that he did it if he didn't help him hide the bodies. As he had already touched Michael Moore, Terry shot a threatening shot, which explains why there's different methods of knots being tied and why one was found further away. Right? Because Michael was found further away from the other two. Also, why a few people heard shots, but the boys were not shot. There was no gunshot wounds, right? The West Memphis police said they found a gun in the Robin Hood Hills, as mentioned in the deposition. It was like a year later. I think that Terry beat the boys. Then he just watched as Mr. Bojangles put the boys and their clothes into the water, which is why he was not overly wet and why he can say and believe that he didn't kill them, because he thinks he truly didn't, because he didn't put them in the water, and according to the medical examiner, at least 2 of them drowned. It also explains why Terry's hair is in the binding, and David Jacoby's hair could either mean it was there, that he was there also at some point, whether during the killings or searching after. It also explains why they were not covered in mud and blood enough to be noticed. But Mr. Bojangles was, because he carried the bodies to the water. He was the quote-unquote bum that lived in Robin Hood Hills. So he cleaned the area up because it was his home. Although I don't think he returned to it, I think he hitchhiked or walked out of town that night. This also explains Terry suddenly claiming to remember the quote-unquote black bum. Either he did tell the police at the time and nothing came of it, or he didn't bother pursuing because the police were already thinking it was West Memphis 3 that did it, or he just brought it up in the deposition because he tried to set another trail away from himself. So that is my theory if it was Terry Hobbs. Theory number 2 is not quite so long and is basically that Mr. Bojangles did it. Possibly with 2 other men. I think he or they stumbled across the boys, and whether the boys teased him and maybe threw rocks at him, like Christopher's brother Ryan told John Mark Byers that he and his friends had done that before. As Byers stated, Ryan and Brett Smith were down there on their bicycles playing and come running home, all white in the face and excited, and said, Dad, we saw a bum or a junkie, or he was somebody, and they were lying in the ditch down there, and we thought maybe they were dead, and we hollered and kind of chucked some rocks at them that way, and they moved. And it was a bum down there. I said, now that's the reason why I don't want y'all down there. So I told Ryan and Christopher on many occasions, don't go play in the Robin Hood. Don't ride your bike there, right? So if they had come across this Mr. Bojangles and thrown rocks at him, so, or maybe he saw them doing something they shouldn't have been doing, but this time he fought back. And things went wrong, and he murdered the boys. I think he hid them because this is where he lived. not because he knew them. He was protecting his home. I think he is the owner of the clothes that they found. There were also hairs found, one that did not match either Damien, Jason, or Jesse, one that belonged to a black male, and fibers from some type of bag that was found at the crime scene. The bag contained the blue jeans, a black thermal undershirt, a pair of white socks, Bic razors, one plastic bag, and one tan short sleeve shirt. The items in the bag were never connected to the West Memphis Three, but I think they were Mr. Bojangles. He washed off at the Bojangles restaurant, then he left the area. The boys were last seen between 6 to 6:30, and Mr. Bojangles was at the Bojangles restaurant somewhere between 8:20 and 8:45. This gives him plenty of time to commit the murders, hide their things, and make it to the restaurant. It even explains why the boys were not covered in mosquito bites. The bodies and clothes being hidden indicate either that whoever did this knew at least one of the boys or had a close connection to the area, or both, right? So I think the woods is his home. John Mark Byers testified that he spoke to a little skinny black guy and a kind of great big heavy black guy come walking out there and, said, well, what's going on? Well, I told him, 3 boys are missing. And he said, well, if they come up here, we'll hold them for you. The fact that Mr. Bojangles came out of the woods, muddy, covered in blood, and seemingly in distress around 8:45 is too much of a coincidence to not be related. That's why I cannot pick between either one.
Makes sense. Yeah.
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 So this case is one of the most heartbreaking cases, not only for the fact that 3 8-year-old boys, Christopher Byers, Michael Moore, and Stevie Branch, were brutally murdered, or that 3 innocent teenagers were imprisoned for 18 years, one of which on death row. We all know prisoners don't treat child murderers too kindly in prison, and they were just young themselves when they went to prison. I can't imagine the horrors that they went through. 6 families were destroyed. But even now, over 30 years later, the real killer or killers have not been brought to justice. Those 3 8-year-old boys still haven't got justice. The 3 teenage boys will never get justice or the 18 years of their lives back and are still tormented by it today. The police were never reprimanded for their mistakes, nor did they take any ownership for them. If there is even the slightest of silver linings, is that if it wasn't for the Paradise Lost documentaries and all the people that stood beside the West Memphis Three, Damien Echols would have been put to death.
He would have.
That's terrible, hey?
Yeah. Yeah, and it sucks that nobody is gonna, no one's gonna come forward, I don't think.
But they are doing something right now, aren't they?
Yeah, so right now they're doing DNA testing. It was finally, I'm pretty sure it was finally approved to go ahead and test DNA. And I will say that's another reason why I think the West Memphis Three are innocent. There is no way, if Damien was guilty, there is no way after being released from prison that he would continue to push for the DNA to be tested. There's no way he would just quietly disappear if he had done this because he got out. He served 18 years, but he was on death row and he is released. There's no way he would continue to push if he had done it.
He did 18 years for this.
Right?
That is...
And Jason Baldwin was 16 when he went to prison.
That is just wild to me.
He spent longer in prison than he did out before.
Yeah.
It's
that's
horrific.
Just wild to me.
Right? And all because the investigation was so poorly handled.
Those cops are dumb.
Yeah.
Well, these cops are dumb.
Yeah. And Damien Echols has to take some ownership because he did not help himself. It was, if he hadn't have acted the way he did, maybe things would have gone differently.
Right.
But we don't know that for sure, right? If he hadn't have made the stupid comments that he made, and he was a dick. He was a complete asshole throughout the whole trial, 100%. But we have to remember he was 18.
Yeah.
18-year-olds are not the smartest. They do stupid shit. And yes, he was old enough to understand he could have been in real trouble there. But he even said himself, he believed in the justice system and he knew he hadn't done this. So in his mind, there was no way he was going to be found guilty.
That's exactly it. right?
Right?
Because he knows he didn't do it. And yeah, he thought there's no way I'm going to be found guilty.
Right?
Doesn't make sense, right?
Yeah, there's
And
no
then,
evidence, there's no
yeah,
nothing, and
and
yet,
then that happened.
yeah. So not that it gives justification for him acting like a dipshit during the trials by any means. There's just, you have to take that into consideration. You
Yeah.
have to realize your frontal lobe is not fully developed till 25.
Hmm.
So as much as, I mean, you're not even allowed to drink alcohol in the US until you're 21. But you think at 18 you're able to like, fully think like an adult? No. If that was the case, then you'd be allowed to drink alcohol, right?
Yeah. So what's Canada's excuse?
For what? For being so dumb? Like as a country in a
Yeah.
whole?
For letting kids drink at 18.
I don't know. See, my theory is if you're old enough to join the military and die for your country, you're old enough to drink alcohol. So either they need to raise the age to join the military to 21 or drop the age of alcohol to 18 because you can't say you're old enough to go die for your country, but you're not old enough to have a beer.
Hmm.
That shit don't make sense. And so at least Canada is aligned in that way. And I don't know, at 18 you're an adult, right? Like you can
I
vote,
know,
you can do all these things.
but I disagree with being 18 and
Oh,
that's
fuck
a
yeah.
whole other episode. We should talk about this one other day. It's like, I totally, it still has teen in it. You're still a teenager. You're
Yeah,
not an adult, right?
right?
You're an adult when you hit 20 or 21, right?
Yeah.
But as
Yeah.
far as 18, 19, like you're still a teenager. You're still so
Yeah.
little,
Right.
right? I
And I
hate
can
that.
say that, like, as someone that got married and had children at 16,
Yeah.
I still say you're not fully,
No, you're not.
like, not at 18. Like,
No.
just because I was dumb and did stupid shit doesn't mean that now as a grown up I can't look back in hindsight and be like, the fuck?
I
I mean,
think putting alcohol and bars and all that shit into an 18-year-old's hand is like it's I don't even know the word. It's not toxic.
it's irresponsible.
It's yeah.
But you know what?
It's
I
like a
like,
train wreck, you
yeah,
know?
yeah.
Yeah.
We could, like you said, we'll have to do a whole episode on that
Yeah.
because there's many things that I feel the age is just not like the age of consent, 14.
Yeah. I thought it was 16. Is it 14?
So
I thought it was 16.
if I'm correct, that you can be 14 and consent with somebody up to the age of 16, and at 16 you consent
Okay.
with others.
I'm not sure.
So like a 14 and a 14-year-old, that's fine. A
Yeah.
14 and a 15-year-old, that's okay. 14 and 16 is where it gets iffy.
Right.
All right, well, that's it for the West Memphis 3. Hope y'all enjoyed it. Come on, man, it was so much fun.
There was some trying times.
There was. It was a lot. It was a lot, and it's heavy, and there was a whole lot of information in some of them that it was just like, oh my God. But you needed that information. It was just
Yeah.
a lot at times. But so that's it for Moms on Mics this week.
Don't forget to follow us on Instagram at Moms on Mics Podcast, on TikTok at Moms on Mics, and join our Facebook group, Moms on Mics.
If anyone has any topics you would like us to cover, or if you have any questions or suggestions, you can email us at momsonmics@gmail.com or submit through our website, momsonmics.com.
We would also appreciate it if you could rate and review us on whatever platform you're listening on. It really helps the podcast move up on their charts so it gets more exposure. I hope you join us again next week. Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.